went actively out of this way to convince these people to believe in these charities, believe in their cause wasn't exactly as just. And rightfully, we didn't rescue him. And we find it abhorrent as a convert. In the United States, a Navy team in the SEAL Team 6 chopper was just shot down 2 weeks ago, like what happened 3 months ago, simply because they wanted to rescue some journalists who will prove later on don't deserve to be rescued anyway. Let's talk about some definitions. Firstly, we're talking about terrorists. We're not referring to these groups of armed men, armed individuals rather, of a pattern for actively killing civilians. We're also believe the definitions here include their objective of spreading terror to these people. Second, we're referring to journalists. We're referring to them across the board. So it could be a blogger, it could be a researcher, it could be anybody who wants to go out of their way here. For example, we're getting schools getting all these information, spread them, things like that. What do they mean by capture? We're referring to these places where people usually contextualize these sorts of things. It usually happens, for example, when people want to get the big, when people want to exchange an interview with this biggest general or biggest, for example, terrorist like Osama bin Laden in these cases, and usually end up kidnapped in this attempt to get this interview. What do I mean by we're not rescuing them? It's a very big giant policy, and it's just sorry guys, good game. Let's do it. Let's start with the first argument. So why do you think they don't deserve to get rescued? We think that the war on terror is not a normal war. And in order to win, we need to do whatever it takes to gain a tactical advantage. And there will be complete loss of tactical advantages when we follow a policy that isn't our policy. So what's going to happen? We think that in many justices, that we've actually already followed all the policies that are consistent with it, and have worked and been good for the war on terror. Point you about unilaterally invading countries, or doing whatever is necessary, bombarding these places, so we can bring justice, and we can stop these terrorists, prevent the net loss of life across the board. Point to you, we even think that might be hard to appreciate, that might cause intense extreme reactions of sadness or grief or outrage. We will point you to extraordinary rendition, which we're finding. We torture people if we know we can get information, if we know to do things to save lives. So why is this? We think that unlike soldiers, unlike civilians, the main difference that we don't actually put them there. What does this mean? If you are a civilian, you weren't, for example, going out there to get this person there. You were living here doing nothing, wanting to do nothing, and you got kidnapped. If you were a soldier, if you broke rank, we wouldn't actually rescue you because it was your fault for deserting this very place. This is something where one is defense in the status quo. You should follow your orders and stay in base and things like that. Now, why is this the case? So why do journalists actually do this? So you look at this. Journalists actually, one, you have to make it clear, they don't have strategic value. They don't tell the government. It's very important whatever useful information they could get from doing what they do. They won't tell you where the cells these terrorists are. They will not tell you, even for example, the plans these people have. They won't even give you any tangible information that could be for a tactical advantage. They just want the two things. To get a scoop. Because what the nature of journalism is, you get these prestigious awards, you get these prestigious things for getting the most controversial, the thing that could get the biggest attention across the board. And that's the thing that we think is incredibly powerful. What it means is, they are aware of the risk they're getting into. There's a big rational calculus. One, a lot of people have already been captured. Because if you're a journalist, you're socially aware, probably read the news and things like that. So you probably know all these things already. But despite all these things, they still do this. And it was not risk or life for these people. This leads to the second argument. Why was comparing them to what we have to use? So look at it this way. I already told you that they usually want these high-profile targets, right? So what does this mean? If you are taken hostage, you are it's not some place for example, in the streets in the city, where it's not actually going to be an average gunman holding this guy beside it. Rather, it's going to be in the most strategic location for these terrorists. It's going to be their biggest bases, their mountainous regions, where there will be no mechanism for you to actually help these people there. Those things. What does it mean? Because it means when you got the interview, there's a big boss, not just an average gunman there. And when they're the most respected places, where you can't actually get it. Three points that are very important. Firstly, you will have to risk soldiers of the highest caliber in order to save them. You didn't have this chance, rather, of saving them. Point, for example, is incredibly rigorous and hard to be dropping down SEAL Team 6, wherein you only have less than 1,000 people in the United States for these kinds of operations. We think that it's unfair that these people who are most well-trained, who are most, for example, get the biggest equipment, all these things, for many years, to risk their life for something has no strategic like calculus to succeed. What do you think is going to happen? We think attackers being unfair in principle. You're putting them in the smart way to lead to many pernicious things. Firstly, you have these all the equipment, all the weapons, all the guns, because there are these people who can eventually end up in the hands of these people. There's a good reason why you don't go to the mountains of Afghanistan, where these people are. Or for example, in northern Syria, where you have people with RPGs everywhere, with helicopter equipment, to have all these things. To do that, you would only have a big disaster to get these people killed. We think that when what happens is terrorists get stronger, it means it's harder, one, for you to fight the war against them. Because when you fight them, they might now be on much more equal ground. But two, they can terrorize people one moment in a much better way, but they can in a more pernicious way, when they, for example, can't do things for the end.
When the scenario is that it's safe to be terrorists, is that if they're located in somewhere, a common area that's easy to invade. Why can't the state be?
These places are not going to happen. I already made it clear, we're talking about high-profile targets, so that's we're going to put them here. So I don't really see how that could make sense anyway. So now going back to my argument, we think, what happens? What are these equipment, right? You have things like very precise armament. You have things, for example, like helicopters, because we show with it. And you have groups like IS, who are so sophisticated, who have like done these things with like the Iraqi army's like tax brigade, the Iraqi army's night mission dollars, and all these things. We think everyone knows that all these happen just because we thought that it was offered this also that this thing would happen. But the main pernicious thing they have to deal with is we don't even know if the person was kidnapped even going to be there. Or two, if they will be killed before we actually even stop them. So one, the goal of this gets met, but you have lost too much life, you made the war much harder, and you create much demoralization. And the principle was never really clear cut. It was all for the truth, and we don't think that's something good.
Sad to see an army helicopter get shot down. Those soldiers died in a manner that you intended to, defending our people. This is literally the reason why our military exists in the first place. To defend civilians, to defend individuals, to the state as a state. To abandon that is to abandon the very reason why these individuals exist in the first place. But secondly, on the idea that these journalists are somehow selfish and they are not worthy of being saved because they're only after the biggest coup. Personally, even if that is true, we say that this group is something that has an immense social value. Obviously, Osama bin Laden being an actor is immensely valuable to us. The idea that Israeli soldiers are using Palestinian children as shields, which by the way, the state probably just honest to them, is also valuable to us as a people. So regardless of whether or not we even think the journalists are absolutely terrible people, they still deserve to be saved, simply because of that. But secondly, on this idea as well, if we do this, terrorists could get guns or whatever. First terrorists decide to kill one of our civilians, that is the easiest way for them to strike at and show that they have capacity to hurt our people. This is what causes panic. This is what causes people to say that our state isn't going to defend us, and our state is ultimately never going to have the willingness or the capacity to defend us, which undermines our position not only among our own people, but among the world, and for that sake.
Madam, soldiers were once citizens too, but they consented to the possibility of dying for a greater social value. How is that any different from a journalist?
When you are a soldier, you explicitly tell your government you're okay with that. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we see people who are individuals who have an immense capacity to defend themselves. Obviously, they are trained specifically to survive combat in the first place, specifically not to get shot. Civilians have very few skills. These journalists have very few skills, other than their ability to assess the situation, other than their ability to actually relay that information. So we don't think that's necessarily an analogous value. But secondly, we think that these journalists have a particular irreplaceable value in the larger society. It is their efforts that bring to the attention of the world the injustices and horrors which individuals not only petition their government to solve and protect, pressure the government to protect, but which directly threaten our own civilians. The fact that ISIS is expanding into Iraq, the fact that our embassy in Benghazi was attacked, the fact that ISIS has made direct threats against U.S. citizenship are all things that directly concern every single U.S. citizen, especially given the recent operationalization, normal point of domestic terrorism. We see so many of our own people who go out to these places to carry out these particular terror attacks. These journalists provide that vital information. They conquer fear to give us that service. But while we may say these journalists are brave, a very large part of the reason why they're able to conquer that fear and disregard their own personal safety is never keep in mind how afraid these individuals are. The reason why news agencies are willing to send them out to dangerous places in the first place is because, in addition to their own many additional precautions, they know that in their hour of need, the state is not going to abandon them behind death. And when they remove that assurance, it becomes so much more difficult for us to get the benefit that particular information will benefit society as a whole, which concerns directly who it interests our own people. Which means that either the state is going to have complete control over that particular narrative, because that's the only place information is going to come from, or information is going to become significantly limited, or lastly, we're just simply going to let a journalist die indefinitely, which we don't think is a good value of time.
Madam, people are not generally oblivious to the abuses that happen in the war. My question is, why do you need to go to the stronghold of the terrorists just to get a scoop and interview the terrorist leader? Those are the people who typically get captured.
The reason why people aren't oblivious to what's happening in the world is the fact that we have these reporters who were doing this in the first place. Are you honestly expecting people to specifically know that Osama bin Laden is in this particular area, or Osama bin Laden is captured? Or conversely, let's talk about what everyone wants them. What about these? Our government doesn't even want us to know. The fact that the Israelis, who we are arming, who we are supporting, are committing great human rights violations in Gaza. These journalists are not only a value to the state, they're a value to the world with every single citizen in it. That's why they need to be protected, and that's why they're more special than almost any other activist we've talked about. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, we have to say that because these journalists aren't ordinary people, because of their special needs and their special place in the hearts and minds of everybody else, it is their destruction and their killing also act as a symbol of power for terrorists. How exactly does that happen? When someone who does have that much importance, someone who is that innocent, who still has that same capacity, and at the same time is still so safe. To say, for example, tell people what a horrible thing terrorism is doing, it means that the terrorists already have an immense capacity to murder us. If they can hurt these actors essentially, there is no incentive for anybody else in those particular areas to convince themselves that I am safe, because my state is going to protect me. Because when you cross that line, it's so easy for the state to say to any American citizen, any British citizen, that because we're living in Mindanao, we really can't help you if you're captured by the MILF. Because we choose to work in government, we really can't help you if someone threatens to be next. For all of those reasons, white rights remain a staple.
We agree with the previous speaker that journalism has a social value. But let's weigh that social value to what we are fighting for here in the meantime. If you think about it, Mr. Speaker, there are different kinds of journalists in the field. You have people who join the army, we call them entrenched journalists. And rarely are those people caught because they came to the military, they contacted the White House, and they're aware of the atrocities happening in Iraq. Meaning, Mr. Speaker, these are the individuals who committed themselves to that journalistic cause. But then, who are the people who always get captured? These people want the big story. They want the scoop. So they go undercover without the permission of the state, without the permission of the government of Iraq, for example. So world while spreading terror, Mr. Speaker. That perspective isn't necessary for people to make an informed choice about the war. Because in the first place, Mr. Speaker, in the Bible war, you don't reveal everything to people. In fact, he told you in First Speaker that journalists who interview these high-profile people in their cells do not reveal their sources, Mr. Speaker, because they want to interview other terrorists in the future. Meaning, they don't really share anything to anyone except for the scoop that they get. Basically, these people are chismosos, they're governors, they're showbiz people, Mr. Speaker, trying to sensationalize an already difficult war. But the people who give us the objective reality on the ground are people who are officially there. People from CNN and BBC are rarely captured, Mr. Speaker. It's the people who blog from Germany, blog from Belgium, who are usually captured. And if ever they're captured, it's usually because they went undercover without the permission of the state. These people don't deserve to be rescued in the first place, Mr. Speaker, because A, the value they're giving us is minimal compared to the plethora of other journalists who are usually not captured. So we think even if we can see there's some minute information that we can get from them, Mr. Speaker. This wasn't really clear, like what specific information you want to derive from undercover journalism, Mr. Speaker. What we have is a plethora of other people verifying things on the ground. Saying, for example, that most of the exposés we have, Mr. Speaker, didn't come from undercover journalists. They came from CNN or BBC or even like Al Jazeera, who actually coordinate with the government in Iraq to make these scoops. So in terms of the mutual exclusivity of that journalistic benefit, it's very minute coming from their side of the house. Their next principle is this. Essentially, they are civilians. And we need to protect our civilians because all other normal civilians will not feel safe if this particular civilian wasn't rescued, Mr. Speaker. Here's the difference. They're not like us. All of us will not go to Iraq and put ourselves in harm's way despite knowing that many other journalists have been kidnapped in the past. That's what differentiates normal citizens from soldiers, Mr. Speaker. Because soldiers are aware and equipped with the tools to actually go fight in the war. And actually, some of these journalists actually train in military operations. That's why they are able to circumvent border controls, for example. That's why they're able to circumvent the freaking government of Iraq or Syria, Mr. Speaker. Because they themselves were trained. For all intents and purposes, they're soldiers for their own cause, Mr. Speaker. They're not ordinary civilians at the end of the day. Closing.
If these soldiers train in a hierarchy deserving of protection of the state, are you then willing to protect these entrenched journalists?
Madam, the soldiers obey the chain of command, right? They follow orders from a hierarchy, meaning they've been trained to follow a particular regimental technique. Now, if you desert your troops and you start like breaking ranks and put yourself in harm's way, we're not going to rescue you either, Mr. Speaker. That's the second principle we've been talking about. I don't know where that analogy is coming from. Let's talk about the values of journalism in my second speaker's case. What is ethical journalism in times of war, Mr. Speaker? The problem with the kind of journalism that open opposition is supporting is that it's extremely sensationalist and personality-based, and essentially it's like all about making people afraid, Mr. Speaker. So essentially, these people who go to the unplaces of terrorists, and again, these are the people who are usually caught, Mr. Speaker, are nothing but fear-mongers. They're people who want us to understand things from the perspective of terrorists so that we are afraid of them, Mr. Speaker. These are bloggers who are willing to just bash the war and attack people left and right. They're not the people who are officially there to represent the government. And mind you, Mr. Speaker, the militaries of the world put even opposition journalists in that particular military regiment. And it's not all like soft network during the time of Bush. Even CNN was allowed to be entrenched in that particular area, even though the Bush administration hated CNN because they were rational and like him, Mr. Speaker. No, secondly, we think that that kind of journalism is the one we support, where you look at objective facts and objective realities, Mr. Speaker. You look at what happened to the war of terror, and you say, fine, already declining in support, even, Mr. Speaker, without the sensationalist journalism that we have, even if we're just reporting the actual facts. If you say, for example, that 300 people died in this mosque bombing, that's enough for people to get riled up and angry about that particular attack. You don't need to go into the mountains and interview high-profile targets here to be able to say that this is an injustice, Mr. Speaker. Facts are more powerful than sensationalism, and the only reason why these people go out of their way to risk their lives is so some credit will go to them for the risk that they took. In fact, Mr. Speaker, that's problematic. No, thank you. Because journalism should be in the service of information, not of themselves, Mr. Speaker. When self-interest takes your calculus so much that you're willing to risk the life, your own life, and the possibility of saving more people in the future for that particular school, we question your motivation, then we question the quality and integrity of the journalism that you have, Mr. Speaker. We think at the end of the day, it's not a question of whether or not people get information, the question is the viability of that information. Here's my question to opposition. I go out of my way and I'm the only person who's able to interview Osama bin Laden, like what the previous speaker said. How is anyone going to verify the content of my interview? No one else can go to that terrorist cell. How am I going to triangulate my data? How am I going to interview anyone else, Mr. Speaker? Compared to the very professional, fact-based journalism that we have, which are entrenched within the military, who, by the way, almost never gets off stage, Mr. Speaker, we think this is a far safer strategy and a far better tool for the public to be informed. We think that information is not a value in itself. Information has to be viewed from the lens of the purpose of the information and the end result of that information. Because in a war, you don't reveal everything. Otherwise, that's an open all or public document for people, right? We want to view things that are ethical. We want to view things that allow people to make informed and not emotional choices for the war, Mr. Speaker. We thank you.
Mr. Chair, we think that there's an inherent value in whatever information that these journalists can get from these terrorists. That's why we don't really care whether or not extensively that these journalists have to get information or they can't be selfish because, they want to be at school. Because essentially, ladies and gentlemen, the state doesn't tell you that you can't go somewhere because the state thinks that you're being selfish or all of those other things. Essentially, Mr. Chair, I'm going to talk about how the war on terror is essentially multifaceted. You can't just kill these terrorists and say, we won. Ideally, Mr. Chair, for you to win the war on terror, you need to get the right information. That information will mean the ideologies of these individuals. What are their motives? How do they recruit? Why do they stay there? Those are information, those are the kind of information that you will need. And the only time that you can get that information is when you actually talk to an actual terrorist. Because there is no way for you to get any other accurate information unless it is from them. So, first thing that I want to really talk about, so there's a value in journalism. You know how there's a social good for journalists only have, because we think, Mr. Chair, that the social good that these journalists get or will create is only present the moment that you get to read the information that they wrote, the moment that they get to return and share whatever information that they learn. We don't agree that just because you're a military man and just because you would disobey protocols, the military will automatically leave you behind. No, there's a concept that is called leave no man behind. Regardless of what your situation is, regardless of whether you might have retreated at the end and got captured, we think the military, in the same way as the state, has an obligation to rescue you, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a citizen, Mr. Chair, because these journalists have an inherent value, because that's the debate. Whether or not these journalists have a value. Now, we said that, these journalists conflict areas by convincing them that, hey, you're the only ones left that, if you support us, will protect you, and all those other things. We think that this is the only way for us to win this war on terror. When you create or when you have accurate information from these journalists who will tell us how we're going to attack or how we're going to go on with these terrorist groups. The next thing that we also didn't respond, Mr. Chair, was when Brady talked about how killing journalists will undermine our position. We think right now that as much as possible, we don't want these terrorists to win. The goal of these terrorists, other than the fact that they have to spread their ideology, is they also want to spread terror to everyone. We think, Mr. Chair, that the moment that you kill these journalists, an innocent citizen who's trying to get information for whatever reason that he wants, we think that whenever you do that, you already put the state in a precarious situation. Because what happens, Mr. Chair, is that you make these civilians uncomfortable. Like if the state can't even protect this journalist who's trying to help you and who's already admitted, who already has an added value to the state, how much more is the army going to protect me? We think, Mr. Chair, that what this is going to do is that it's essentially going to create much terror within these states. Essentially, Mr. Chair, this is going to make terrorists win even more because now the civilians don't feel safe at all. We think that it's better for you to rescue these journalists because at the end of the day, other than the fact that they give good information or accurate information, which by the way, I'm not sure if you know this, but we've been reading this to Macroload on any other debate about terrorism. But other than that, Mr. Chair, the state also has to make sure that the civilians will continuously feel safe. Because if the state, for example, can't even make their civilians feel safe, then there is no way for them to convince the civilians that you know they're safe from terrorists and all these other things. Don't you know? Okay, fine.
Again, they're not the same as ordinary citizens. We don't go out of our way to make our lives easy for these first two. Ordinary people just run away.
Yeah, but they have a value. They have a reason why they don't run away. Because they have a goal. They have to get the information. The same way as how military men have a goal to kill or whatever it is their mission. Journalists, on the other hand, their goal is to get information, go back, express whatever it is that whatever interview or whatever information that they got from these terrorists. I think that in the end, the debate all boils down to whether or not these journalists, whatever it is that they're going to make up, is this going to be valuable? We think that yes. If you want to attack these terrorists, not just by, for example, killing them,